Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show that talks about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I hope you'll join me as I chat to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. You may also wish to join the conversation over in the Let's Talk Near Death online community, which is found at www.letstalkneardeath.com. Membership is free, or you're welcome to upgrade to join the live VIP events, to gain early access to episodes, or to receive extra VIP bonus material. Your support helps me to continue to get episodes out and to help grow the conversation around these types of experiences. But before then, let's talk near death.
They were born in the 40s and then they died in the 80s in this life, and they didn't learn the lesson, and their soul guide says, you've got to go back, you've got to do it again and learn that lesson. And so they say, right, I've been born and it's 1958. And so she thinks, hang on a second, you said the last life you were born in the 40s and died in the 80s. How can you be born in 58? You hear stories of them floating above their body and looking down on the people around the body, and, you know, just like you would hear in a near-death experience. And she said that about 15%, 10 or 15% of the children talk about encounters with aliens as part of their near-death experience.
Today on the show is our guest Simon Bown, a hypnotherapist, a past life regressionist, and the host of the Past Lives podcast. Simon graduated from the Past Life Awakening Institute and is also a member of the International Practitioners of Holistic Medicine. Simon has had his own paranormal experiences, including psychic flashes, Ufo sightings, and a number of strange events that can't be easily explained. These events have led him to believe that we are more than flesh and blood, and that we are energetic beings in a cycle of reincarnation with the aim of experiencing everything that is to be experienced as a human being. Simon is also a musician, he's a science fiction writer, and I can't wait to chat to him in more depth today. So Simon Bown, welcome to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thanks a lot. It's really kind of you to ask me to come on.
I have listened to your podcast, the Past Lives podcast, for quite a few years now. It's been my go-to one when I've either been in the gym first thing in the morning, or usually when I'm in the garden trying to ground myself, and I put in my headphones and I pull out some weeds and do some fun things like that. And I have so enjoyed listening to all the guests that you've done. You've got a lot of research behind you, a lot of really interesting information, interesting people. I'd love to start by going back to the beginning. I know that you've had some amazing experiences, but what is it that got you interested in these types of experiences? What got you interested in regression and hypnotherapy and paranormal experiences?
Well, I always feel like I've had an interest. I remember 10 years old at the local public library getting the books out on anything that was unexplained and supernatural. And in those days, I'd read anything where it was about Bigfoot or fairies and UFOs and the afterlife, and it kind of changed over time. So as I got older, I stopped reading about Bigfoot, and it was just really things to do with the afterlife and UFOs, which seems like two completely separate things. But recently, I think over the last few years, we've been seeing connections between the two that are interesting. But then I had other experiences over time when I was younger that kind of suggest to me that, you know, that there is stuff going on beyond us. And I think these things happen all around us all the time to so many people, but people are scared to talk about it because they don't want to seem weird.
Yeah,
but you
exactly.
know, when I had these psychic flashes and really powerful dreams and UFO sightings, and they led me through to going to see mediums and clairvoyants and being taken through past life regressions. And I sat with a channel and for an hour long just talking to them, and it was apparently the spirit of a 3,000-year-old person, somebody died 3,000 years ago. And it's just, you just read so many books because you're interested in it. But it's almost also the same thing if you're in your late teens and in your 20s. Nobody you know is interested in this as well. And you sort of turn into the nerd, and nobody wants to talk to you if you start going on about those things.
And now everybody wants to talk to you. Everybody wants to know all of the research that you've done. What did you find in those books all those years ago?
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot in there. Are you happy to share the psychic flashes, for example? How did that happen? What was that like for you? And how did that happen? How old were you?
Well, I was, this was about 98, so 22 years ago. So I'd have been early 30s. And I was coming over to your part of the world. A friend of mine in Christchurch was getting married. And she asked me to bring her some awful piece of London tourist tat as a wedding present. So I went into the centre of London, into Soho, and I bought her a tea towel with the London Underground map on it. And it was quite early in the morning. It was a nice day. It was very sunny but cold. And then it was maybe for 30 seconds or so, I was sitting next to her. She was driving a small red car. We were going through the suburbs of Christchurch. We were having this conversation. And I saw the houses and the street signs and what she was wearing. And, I'd never been to Christchurch before. I didn't know what that part of Christchurch looked like. But 2 weeks later, when I was there, it was exactly the same. And it wasn't sort of similar. I remember the street signs, the road names are the same, the conversation we were having the same, the way the houses are and the colours that the houses were painted. And I remember taking a corner and going down this road. And it was 30 seconds of time that I seemed to see 2 weeks before I got there. So, I've talked to other people about this. Oh, that's just deja vu. That's nothing. But you don't get 30 seconds.
That's the other way around, though, isn't it? Deja vu is when you're in, like you were in Christchurch driving those roads and you remembered it.
Yeah. And then it got to a point I said to her, I've done this before. But she knew me enough to go, oh, yeah, typical. I know what you're like.
Yeah.
And, there's lots of little things that I think everybody gets as well, little synchronicities. Like you'd be thinking of a song and you might not have heard it for 10 years. And then that's the next song that comes on the radio. And that could happen so often to me. And I'd have no idea, And also there was the Stranglers song, Golden Brown. When I first heard that on the radio, I was, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that from when I was like 4 or 5 years old. But actually, it had just been released, just been written. And I was listening to it in the 80s, but I was 4 years old in 1969. And I could recite the words. And so there was some weird connection with my memory there, because it really felt like I remember that from when I was really small. These are the weird kind of psychic flashes, but I would never claim to be a psychic. I've got no control over it. It's not like anything useful ever comes out of it. And I can't sit down and sort of go into some kind of meditation and then it starts happening, Just wish, it's that old classic thing. I wish I could get the lottery numbers.
Yeah, exactly. So is it something that still happens in your life today? You still have these flashes?
It doesn't happen so much now, no. I get some weird things with numbers, and I'm not sure if we see the things with numbers because we're looking for them, or if it's really there. But I tend to get it in a stretch of weeks, and then it just won't be there for months, and then it'll happen again, which kind of suggests to me that something's happening. And it's almost like the universe is trying to tell me something, but I've got no idea what it is.
Yeah, I hear this so often as well. There's a message there, but I don't know what it is. I don't know how to interpret it. Can you help me? And I think I don't really know how. Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. So your family, did you tell your family about this at the time?
Yeah, well, my younger brother's interested. My older brother, if I try to talk to him about anything like this, he quickly goes, stop, you're creeping me out. I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
My mum was very interested, and back in the 80s, she got the, like Shirley MacLaine's books.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so
Okay.
I would read those as well. And she was a big fan because she was a dancer and, a movie star.
Yeah.
And so my mum started really getting interested in it as well. So it was a kind of thing where she'd go off and see a medium and we'd talk about it. Then I'd go off and see a medium and we'd talk about it.
What did the medium say? Did they have any kind of answers or insight into why these experiences were happening, or what came out of those sessions?
Well, they would say to me things like, you're going to be a healer. That's what you're going to do when you get older. And I would think, well, I don't think so. And now here I'm the hypnotherapist.
Yeah.
And there was another time this medium sat there, said, oh, there's the man here, it's George, he wants to talk to you. And I said, I don't know a George. And she said, okay, we'll move on. And then she said, no, George is here. He's got something to say. And I was like, I don't know a George. And I got home afterwards and I said to my mum, look, she kept saying George wanted to talk. She goes, well, that's your granddad.
Oh.
And he died when I was very small and I only ever knew him as granddad.
Yeah.
I didn't know his George. So I found that to be, interesting that she would come up with that name like that.
Mm. And so what led you into your first regression, your past life regression? Was it through these experiences that you're having, these flashbacks, psychic flashes, I suppose? Was it wanting to know more or to understand further?
Well, I went into the College of Psychic Studies in London and I would go there regularly, and they had a huge library, and it was like out of the Victorian era it was quite dimly lit and there were tall shelves made of oak full of books.
Oh,
But
wow.
book sessions there. They had people who were training to be mediums, and you could book a session with one of those guys that would be really cheap, or you could talk to a clairvoyant, a clairaudient, and psychics. And so I was going there and I saw past life regression. And this was about, I think, 1987 or 88. And so I booked for that and I talked to the lady. And when I got in there, she said, I'm not a hypnotist. What I would call this guided meditation. And that was very interesting. And I later went on to have some kind of verification of the past life that I saw. And it was I went into this. It was kind of like I went into this 7-year-old girl's body, and I got this year came into my mind of 1896, and I was in this park in London, and it was a very steep slope in this park. And if you're a town planner, you wouldn't look at this real steep slope and say, "Oh, that's a good place for a park." And that's how I was able to spot it, because years later I was driving in North London and I saw it exactly as it was in the regression. And I'd never been to that part of London before, so it wasn't like it was lodged in my subconscious, and it sort of came out later. But it was very physical as well. And as I was small and in this park, I could actually feel like the grass between my toes. And at one point, I was lying back on this couch with my eyes closed, and I opened my eyes a little bit and looked down, and it's like where my knees were, I could see little feet, as though they were my feet, and I was that much shorter.
Oh.
And then the life went on, and I saw my time. I talk about this as if it's real, and I'm still not 100% sure this stuff happens, because, that's my skeptical side. But I saw a life as a nurse in the First World War in France, tending to soldiers who were just coming off the front line. And we were just a couple of miles behind the front line, it seemed. And they'd just have their legs blown off and these terrible injuries. And it seemed like I was there for a couple of years tending to these guys. And what I find interesting is about a few months ago, I did a past life regression and I went back to that life. And I was older and I was married to this man who thought too much of himself and thought very little of me. And it was kind of emotional because I got kind of angry with him. I was hypnotized. I was so relaxed, but I felt this anger coming up, and it was saying in my head, I was thinking, you don't know who I am, what I'm capable of. You treat me like I'm some silly woman. I spent 2 years on the front line tending to these soldiers. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what I'm capable of. And it's this thing in the past life regression and the hypnosis. This stuff comes through so strongly, and so the emotions are so strong. And I kind of feel, in a way, that's a verification of the regression as well. Because if you were just making it up, you wouldn't get that angry, and you wouldn't get so emotional. And when I take people through past life regressions, so many times I see people crying their eyes out and getting angry. And then we finish and I take them out the hypnosis and they got huge smiles on their faces. That was amazing.
I'd love to really address one thing that you brought up there. You said it was the inner critic in you sort of questioning different things. I had a past life regression a couple of years back. It was actually, I gave myself a birthday present and I went and did this regression. And it was amazing. When you're talking about being the nurse on the front line in the war, I actually had something very similar to that. But as I was in this regression, I don't know whether it's, gosh, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know whether it's that I wasn't deep enough under or in a deep enough hypnosis, but I was able to actually be very aware that I was in the room, lying on the couch. I was very aware of everything going around me, but also experiencing these different lifetimes. What would you say, like, how do we know that we're not just imagining these things?
I know, that's a great question. And because when you're doing it, it is in your imagination, isn't it? It's in your mind's eye, and that's how you think, well, I could take control of these images and take them wherever I want to. But I did a past life regression recently, and it was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I went to a life as a woman about 30 years old in 17th century Venice. And I'm actually planning to go to Venice as soon as the world calms down, because I want to walk around and see if I can find these locations.
Yeah.
But we came out of it and she said to me, I said, it seems like you're making it up. And she said to me, but if you were making it up, would you make that past life up for yourself? Would you choose to be a woman in 17th century Venice?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, no, I'd choose to be a Spitfire pilot in the Second World War. So that's one of the things. If you say, are you just making it up yourself? The life that you're looking at is would you choose that for yourself? And sometimes the lives that people go through in past life regressions can be quite mundane. There's no huge dramatic stuff going on, and they're not famous. And it's like, well, if you were making it up, you'd give yourself a few £1 million or something.
No, I love that, because within mine, it was probably more that my mind was on overdrive and sync. I wasn't engaged as much as I probably could have been, but I couldn't get over the amount of detail, the specific detail. I think I had 3 or 4 lifetimes in this regression. It went on, it was quite a few hours actually. It was amazing. But I came out of it going, I couldn't recreate that. I couldn't dream up this type of lifestyle and how all of the little elements fitted in, whether that was the clothing that I was wearing was right for that time period, or the people around me. It was so interesting. So it's a question I know that listeners will have as well, is how can you be sure? How can you trust it? And then I think that probably leads into, can you run through what actually happens in a past life regression session?
Yeah, well, I suppose there's lots of people who do it have different ways of doing it. And you would the process that I would go through is it's a relaxed guidance. So you guide somebody through breathing and then muscle relaxation, and then you go into visualization, and that could be visualizing some warm, loving light, and you do it in stages. So it's in your head, and then it moves down your neck and your shoulders, and you talk through relaxation. And also you use words like deeper. You say you're going deeper and deeper, and that sort of takes you more into the relaxation. And you imagine this warm, loving light going right through your body and down your legs. And that there's that kind of visualization. And then you would move, say, to some point in your life where it's a good, happy place. So I would say peaceful confidence. Go to a part of your life. And so what that's doing is getting you to regress and to start to use that part of your subconscious of going back in time. So we haven't got to a past life yet. And also, because sometimes past lives, you can go into something traumatic and emotional. What we can do is say, okay, you're in this position of peaceful confidence. How do you feel? Where do you feel that in your body? Remember how that feels. And then we can say, you're going to have this for the rest of the session. And this is going to back you up. And this is going to be something you can draw on. So if you do get through to a past life that's traumatic, you've got that. You could say it's in your toolkit for things that you can bring to the client. You can say, well, let's bring that back in. You can use this in this moment. And also, because you're doing therapy, you're looking for emotion. When we do past life regressions, we're not looking for names and dates and places, so later we can go and start looking it up. That's the last thing we want. We're looking for connections as well. So we might see somebody in the past life and say, okay, pay attention to them and their energy. Do you recognize them as somebody in this life? They've incarnated with you again. And it may be that there's patterns. You can see them doing something in a past life and they're doing it in this life. And you can look to stop those patterns if they're not beneficial. So I would take them through the past life and we would jump about and we would look at something and examine a space. And then we say, okay, we're going to jump forward now to a significant event in that life, something that's connected with your present life, something that may be causing you issues. And so we go hunting around looking for this. And if they're looking for a specific problem, we can say, take us to the source of that issue. And so you can jump. It's called an effect bridge. It'll bridge you over to where you want to be. So, and then after that, we'll go through the life and we go through the death, which is also something that we don't spend a lot of time on. It's very peaceful and we move past it quickly because sometimes it might be a traumatic death. Most of the time people say, I'm very old and I'm in a bed and my family's all around me. And somebody said to me once, it's a lot easier to die than to be born. And so then we're looking over the body and we move to a space where you can talk to your higher self or your spirit guides. And I have a whole set of questions ready. And I also say to the client, before we start, is there anything you want to ask them? I'll write it down and I'll have it ready for you. And the questions are things like, am I on the right path? And how is that previous life connected to this life? And what lessons can we learn? And also there's other things like saying, if we have the ability before we're born as a soul to choose the body for this life, why did you choose this specific body? And that you get some really interesting, profound answers. And I say to the clients, just relax, go with the flow, just tell me whatever comes to your mind. And these things come really fast sometimes, and they can be really profound and really go in depth. And your clients say to me afterwards, I got so much from that. That was so interesting to see what's coming. And even though I'm pretty sure that these past lives are real, there's also almost a thought that, does it matter if they're real, if you're getting some real benefit from it? If it's just, I don't know, metaphors and symbology.
Yeah, exactly. So that brings me to my question is, what is the purpose of a regression? Is that for healing? Is it for releasing stuck patterns or routines? Or is it to understand more? Or is it simply a curiosity thing? What is the main reason that somebody would want or should have a regression?
Well, what I do is I offer the kind of exploratory thing as well as the therapy, because all the decades I've been doing it, I've never sought therapy. I've always been an explorer, always wanted to see just what happens. And so I want to offer that to other people. But also there's the therapeutic side. And sometimes you can go into the exploration sessions and something will come up that seems really important. And so we can use the therapeutic techniques, even though that's not what they're looking for. You know, sometimes it can get very emotional and it will be something, you'll look at it and you'll think, the spirit guides or whoever, your higher self, has chosen to show you this life for a reason. And it's probably something you need to see this, because it will benefit you in this life. And if this, what you're seeing, is bad for you, we'll go through this process of cutting it off, we call it breaking the bonds of time. And it's almost like your subconscious is bringing it through from a previous life. And so there's this whole, it's all scripted out, this way of dealing with it, where you would talk to the subconscious, and the subconscious always wants to do the best it can for you. And so you'd say to the subconscious, what you're doing is, you're doing a really good job, and we really appreciate it. This is great how you're doing this. But actually, we want to leave behind this particular thing because this is negative. And so subconscious, do you agree to leave this behind? And the subconscious will say yes. And the client will get that in their mind straight away. They'll say yes. And then we'll say, okay, well, how much can we leave behind? 60%, 70%? And then they'll get a percentage. And so we go through all that process. And then there's a whole load of other stuff that comes with that. And it's a thing of, a hypnotic thing of breaking the connection to the emotions and maybe the contracts and the intentions and all these kind of emotional things, and leaving them in the past. And that can be very effective. So, your question, I do exploratory ones and therapeutic stuff, but the therapy ones could be done over 3 or 4 sessions, or sometimes 2 sessions, but the exploratory is just the 1 session.
Yeah. Gosh, it's so interesting, isn't it? I love that you brought up contracts, and you previously talked about incarnating in different lifetimes and being able to see those different lives. Do you think that we pre-plan our life before we come? Do you think that we choose the contracts? Do we have a soul group? Why do we keep coming back?
Yeah, I know that's the thing. What I get through so many books that I've read and so many sources over the years is that it is to do with soul contracts and soul groups. And I've done over 140 episodes, and just about every single guest will be somebody who's got a book out, and I read their books to build up the questions I'm going to ask them. So it's almost 140 books now that I've read just while I'm doing the podcast on this subject matter. But with the soul groups, it does seem to be, and once again, I'm getting a bit skeptical here, like nobody can tell you 100% what's going on, I don't believe. But it seems to be that there is a group of souls that you work with, and you look at a life that's coming up, and then maybe you have your soul guides, and they may be like mentors to the soul group, or like the soul group is the class and the soul guides are the teachers. And so you work together, and you might be looking at a life. Well, the next life you need to experience betrayal, because you need to learn that lesson. You need to learn what that's like. And so you get together with 2 or 3 other people in the soul group, and you say, okay, how are we going to do this? And somebody, well, I'll be your husband, and somebody else, I'll be your mother. And then they work out how some kind of betrayal can happen in a life. And so you learn from that. And as a soul, that teaches you and helps you move forward, because it all seems to be about every life is learning a lesson. And sometimes you might need several lives to learn one lesson, and other times you might need one life to learn several lessons. So you have those kind of contracts that are set up, and you would have a life plan. And then you would then go on and say, okay, you would choose your body. And I've done this in a past life regression. I got to this point where it was almost like a department store with these mannequins in front of me. And I was there with a guide, and they were saying, okay, which one of these do you choose to be your body for the next life?
Yeah.
And so there's all that kind of work. And then you have a life plan. It's all planned out. But at the same time, there's no guarantee that you'll stick to the plan, or that any of the members of this group will stick to the plan. They might just go off and do their own thing. And this is all part of the way it works, I suppose. It's why you might not learn a lesson in the lesson you're supposed to.
Do you think that's okay, though, if we were to not stick to the plan and go off? Because you talked about betrayal there. If you have a particular relationship and you've set it up so that you can betray somebody, and that's actually part of the plan for this lifetime, if you then show up and actually you live a really, I'm not going to say a better life, because if that's part of the plan, who says whether it's better or not, but you don't betray the person, have you failed at your life? Can you fail it? Or is it just that the life then goes on a different way, and perhaps another lifetime we have to learn that betrayal lesson?
Yeah, you'd have to learn that betrayal lesson. And one of my guests was talking about a client of hers, and this seemed quite strange at the time. This client was supposed to learn a lesson, and they were born in the 40s, and then they died in the 80s in this life, and they didn't learn the lesson. And their soul guide says, "You've got to go back. You've got to do it again and learn that lesson." And so they say, "Right, I've been born, and it's 1958." And so she thinks, hang on a second, you said the last life you were born in the 40s and died in the 80s. How can you be born in 58? And so that sort of led on to this idea that you can live two lives at the same time, and you can have parallel lives. And also, in the regression, they talked about dying at 90 years old and what their death was like. But you think, hang on, if they're born in 1958, then their death is in 2048. So now they're seeing into the future. And so one of the questions I have with the clients when they get to the soul guide section is, what percentage of your soul energy did you bring into this life? And sometimes I say, well, 25% of my soul is in this life. 75% is off doing other things, maybe being in another life or doing something else in the universe.
Yeah.
It just gets more and more complicated.
It does, but so much more interesting as well. I love it. What do you think we do? As you just said that, I'm reminded, I was asked literally yesterday, what do you think we do when we're not living out a life in this world? What do we do? What do we do in the afterlife, I suppose, is the question.
Well, this is a good question. I get all sorts of things from this. I've read all sorts of things. There's talk of like the Michael Newton model, what he goes through with the soul groups and the council of elders, and meeting with like choosing your body and putting the soul contracts together. And then there's other suggestions that there's lots of recreational time, and there's all sorts of things. But part of these recreational things is creativity, where I've heard people talk, and once again I'm getting my skeptical hat on, I talk of they go to other planets as spirits, and they work on creating plants and animals, and it's just part of their energy and something they do and part of their learning. And then of course they have lives on other planets where they may live as some kind of a dolphin creature or live in some kind of a civilization. And most of those people talk about being in a civilization that is a lot more spiritual than Earth, and the Earth is in a really dark place at the moment when it comes to spirituality and knowing about the universe.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's such a big conversation. And I guess somebody listening to this who hasn't been exposed to these types of ideas or concepts might be thinking we're absolutely nuts, but none of it phases me. It is so, so interesting. I'd love to tap into some of the research you've done. I know you've interviewed many, many people who have had near-death experiences. Is there any difference, or do you see any difference or any patterns or anything like that with people who might have a past life regression, who have had a near-death experience, compared to somebody who hasn't?
I haven't looked at that. That's a good question. You know, I with reincarnation, I hear about things that might relate to near-death experiences, where people before they're incarnated talk about what their perception is like and what they do as a spirit, and it sounds almost exactly the same as the near-death experience descriptions of when they're out of their body. I see a consistency there. And also children who remember past lives talk about what happened when they were killed in their last life and what happened to them after their death and what they did. And you hear stories of them floating above their body and looking down on the people around the body, and, you know, just like you would hear in a near-death experience. So I see those consistencies.
Why is it that children, well, actually, that's probably more my perception, is that children are more open spiritually, children are more likely to remember past lives or spiritual experiences up to a certain age. Why is that? Any insight into that?
Not really. It's one of those big questions. It does seem that they could have a lot of memories, and then around age 7 it all starts drifting away. And also sometimes children talk about their past life and they're taken to the place, the house they say they used to live in, and the parents walk around with the house with them. The kid looks really kind of strange. They got the weird look on their face, and the kid then son kind of goes, okay, I've seen it now, we can go. And they go off, and then it's like very quickly they stop talking about the previous life. The memories seem to fade away, and they turn into a normal, happy kid. It's like they've had some kind of closure. And the children can have such specific, proper memories of the previous lives. It gets into so much detail. It's not just little things. And also there's the phenomenon of the birthmarks and birth deformities. And also, I was reading about Burma, Myanmar, and how, the Japanese fought the British there, and children were born after the war claiming to be Western soldiers. And there was a photograph of a lineup of 4 children. They're all brothers and sisters. And the one that claimed to be British was much lighter skin and had blonde hair.
Oh, wow.
And didn't look like they fit in that family. And, there's a young boy who talked about the life as a teacher who was shot in the head on the way to school one morning, because he might have been a teacher, but he was also a bit of a vagabond, and he hung out with the wrong people. And the researcher, Dr. Ian Stevenson, got the autopsy from the previous life, and the boy had birthmarks on his head at the back and the front, exactly the same spots as where the bullet entered and exited the skull of the previous life. And he's actually got hundreds of those kind of verifications.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? My mind is blown when I think about these things, because I've read so many accounts for maybe somebody was stabbed and then they're able to track it back that it's this person. They either have a regression where they see that they were that person, they trace back the information and find out they were stabbed. But in the current lifetime, they might have like you say, a birthmark, a line, or something which is right on that stab wound. And I just find it so interesting that we can carry things over. So is that a big part of doing the hypnotherapy and doing the regression, is being able to release any trauma that's still within the current body from the past life?
Yeah, I did a session this week, and the man had pain in his abdomen between his belly button and his crutch, and that lower abdomen area. He always had pain, and he's had procedures with the doctors, and they've tried to fix him, and they haven't found anything wrong, and they couldn't fix it. And we went to a past life where he felt tremendous guilt. And I said to him, well, if you could center that feeling anywhere in your body, where would you say? He says, in my lower abdomen. So we went through this process of releasing the guilt. And then we moved on to another previous life where he saw himself, he was kind of described like he was just like the 4 Musketeers in that kind of garb. And he was in a duel, and he died by being stabbed in the lower abdomen.
Oh, wow.
So we did another release for releasing that as well. And I've got a session with him soon in a few days, so I'll be able to get some feedback and see how he feels now after we've done that.
Yeah, that must be so exciting when people come back and they say, oh, well, actually it doesn't hurt anymore, or it's feeling better. Yeah, that must be very rewarding to see your work actually changing people's lives like that.
Yeah.
Is regression something you can do on yourself? And I say that with a bit of a warning if somebody's listening. I'm obviously not an expert in this area, but Can you do a regression on yourself? Not necessarily past life, but can you do hypnosis on yourself? Is it safe to do that? Can you get stuck somewhere, or how does that work?
No, the thing about hypnosis is what I always say to the clients is it's just a really nice deep relaxation, and your brain waves go into the similar brain waves you have when you're falling asleep, and you will never feel like you couldn't just get up and stop it anytime you want. And if you did fall asleep, you'd just wake up as normal a bit later on, and you can't get stuck in it as far as I'm concerned. I remember seeing a news report of a stage performance, and the hypnotist fainted, and all of the people on stage who'd been hypnotized him just sat there like they were stuck.
Oh no.
And I was thinking, they're not stuck. What are they doing? But then stage hypnosis is a whole different thing.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of pressures going on there that's just not related to hypnotherapy. And people worry about that as well, I think.
What do you mean it's not related to hypnotherapy?
Well, I think with stage hypnotism, what the first thing that they do is they can bring a lot of people up on stage, and they look for the hypnotist will be doing little tricks and things, and it's all comedy and the audience is laughing. But what he's actually doing is trying to find out the people who are most suggestible, who are most sort of extravagant with their moves and everything they do, and look like the most likely to play along with what he's doing. And so he'll gradually send people back to the audience. You might be left with 5 people, and they're the most pliable, the most likely to play along with it. And I think also if you're on stage in front of a lot of people, you don't want to look foolish by not doing what the hypnotist wants you to do, and you don't want to let the hypnotist down. And you are a bit hypnotized, so there's all that going on, which won't go on with a hypnotherapist when you're on a private session. You know, if you don't go into hypnosis, it's not like there's a whole audience watching you, and it's not like the hypnotherapist doesn't have experience with this and can work with you. You know, so there's a whole load of different pressures on either side of it. That's how I see it, anyway.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I'd had that thought as well, especially from my own experience, where I was very aware of the room and what was going on around me, but I was in this state of hypnosis. So I've often wondered that, because they seem to be so deeply engaged in being hypnotized that, you know, they're on the stage, they'll do anything, they'll look like a complete clown, they'll make everybody laugh. And I've always wondered, how is that possible? Because exactly what you've just said, there's still an element of they are a little bit connected to the current moment and have some element of control. Yeah. So fascinating. I have to ask, the UFO sighting. Yeah. Are you happy to share about that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. I was driving home from a gig one night. I was playing bass in this blues band, and it was a Sunday night jam gig out west of London. And so I was heading home into London about 1 a.m. on a Sunday night. And this was decades ago, so there was far less traffic. And this was a road that I've travelled quite often, so I knew what was there. And you know, we drive on the left-hand side of the road, and up ahead on the left was a really, really bright light off the side of the motorway. And I was thinking, that's weird, because it's just fields there. There's no buildings. And so I thought maybe it's emergency works, like a gas main repair or water or something. And I went under a bridge, and then there were some trees, and then I saw it, and it was a UFO, and it was about the size of a large house, just like, I don't know, 100 feet off the ground, 75 feet off the ground, just off the side of the motorway. And it didn't move an inch the whole time. And it was shaped like a rugby ball, with the whole of the bottom half of the craft was covered in tiny little red pin spot lights, like we might see LEDs in these days, but this was decades ago, before LEDs were invented. And there was a really powerful white beam of light pointed at the ground. And so I just slowed down to about 5 miles an hour, and I'm leaning forward and I'm looking up out of the windscreen. So I got a really good look at it. It wasn't just a quick flash. And like I said, it didn't move an inch, and it was silent. And there's a kind of mental checklist you go through. You think, well, it's not a helicopter. It's definitely not an aeroplane. It's not a hot air balloon. and I just couldn't explain it. And I also knew enough about UFOs that when I got home, I checked the time to make sure there was no missing time, because that's a phenomena that's related to the abduction phenomena, which is a whole other thing. And so there was that, and I talked to a UFO researcher who said to me that you won't see them unless they want you to see them. And it's a kind of, I've found little connections as well recently with UFOs and aliens and near-death experiences. And I've just released an episode with PMH Atwater, and we talked about her book, Forever Angels. I don't know if you know that one.
Yeah, very familiar with that, yeah.
And she said that about 15%, 10 or 15% of the children talk about encounters with aliens as part of their near-death experience. And so we're starting to see that weird kind of connection. And also with alien abduction, it's a spiritually transformative experience, and the people have the same after effects as people have had near-death experiences, where they can't wear watches and they have psychic flashes and they have PTSD. And so there's some kind of weird connection there. That there was another one I spotted when I was talking to this past life regressionist, Mark Beale. He does something called spirit releasement therapy, where a very small part of it is to do with aliens. And he said it's like the people feel the aliens have attached a device to them, and it's monitoring them the whole time. And I was saying, what, physically? And he goes, no, in the astral plane, and I have to hypnotize them, and then we talk to the alien and we say, would you mind taking it off, please? And not like arguing with the alien. So that's the kind of symbolic or metaphorical thing, it seems. And then I talked to another guest, and she talks about waking up one night and there are 3 aliens in the bedroom, and she got out of bed and was walking towards them, and she felt funny, and she looked back and she saw her body was still in the bed. It was like she was having an out-of-body experience. And then I think she quickly went back to her body and woke up again, and the aliens weren't there. So it was kind of like she could see them in the astral plane, but not normally physically. And this other guy's talking about aliens in the astral plane attaching devices. So there's that little kind of connection there. This is what I'm always looking for, these consistencies and connections. And I did a past life regression where I was not at all there for aliens and UFOs. This was all about going through a past life. And so we did that. And then I went through this death, and she said to me, okay, just float away. Just tell me the next thing you see. And then suddenly I was terrified, and it went from 0 to 100% in a second. And she said afterwards, she could see all my muscles in my legs and my back and my arm. I was shaking all over, and I could feel it. I was quivering. And what I saw was that I was lying on a table with these aliens around me, like an abduction. But, it's that skeptical side of me again. When I think about it, I think it didn't really happen. But I have talked to 2 or 3 researchers who specialize in alien abductions, and they've been guests on the podcast, and all 3 of them said, no, we think it probably did happen, which makes you wonder about the alien abduction phenomena. And there's me being a nerd again, and, really getting into it and examining it.
Oh, I love it. Never stop being a nerd. But I love that you bring the skeptic side into it, because I know we all have a skeptic side. It's, really interesting what you're talking about. I remember that I had a friend at high school, and she was telling me these stories. I had zero belief in anything back then. I'd had my near-death experience, but kind of was just, I'd put that away. That was in the too hard basket. And she was telling me how she's having these visitations, and then she was coming out in bruises, and she had like little holes, which could have been anything. And she kept saying, the only thing I can explain is I'm getting abducted. And I thought she was absolutely crazy. But it's really helped me to understand later on when I hear these stories. I hear a lot of these stories. I don't necessarily release them in the episode so much, but I do hear a lot of stories, exactly what you're saying. And I think that we've got to have a skeptic side, but we've also got to take note of the stories. We've got to hear that so many people are saying the same things. There's got to be something behind it.
There's a saying that's keep an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Just one little thing for me is that there was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School who, you have to be a really good psychiatrist to get that job. And
Yeah.
he worked with 130 people who claimed to be abducted by aliens. And after it all, he said there is definitely something happening. Something external to these people is interacting with them. And I think, well, if somebody who's a psychiatrist, who's got to be really good at it and is very clever, would say something like that after his experience, then surely there should be something to it. We should be listening to him.
Exactly. Do you think the near-death experience and the abduction type of thing, do you think that they could be the same thing perceived in a different way? Is there any crossover?
I haven't heard much crossover. When all the people I've interviewed and all the books I've read, I don't think I've heard anybody really say that they've interacted with aliens or UFOs when they've had their near-death experience. There is suggestion that, we have lives on other planets. But in the reincarnation stuff I've read, I've never read about somebody saying they're having a life as an alien on Earth that's abducting people.
Yeah.
But I feel like as far as the alien adoption goes, they are not just like Star Trek. They're just creatures in metal spaceships going through the galaxy. It's interdimensional and it's astral and it's universal, just like say our souls are and our spirits are. And it may be that they're us and just in another form doing something else. But why they'd be doing it, I've got no idea.
Yeah, there's so much we don't know, isn't there? So much.
Yeah.
Going back to the interviews you've done, the near-death experiences, what are some patterns that you've seen, or what is something that really stands out to you as you've done this work over 140 episodes?
I think there's a theory going around, which I started thinking about this myself, is that you get the near-death experience that you need, that it's based on you, because we know that near-death experiences are kind of tailored to the individual and to your culture. And so it's more like your spirit guides are watching you and they see that you're dying and they think, oh, now's our chance, quick, grab them, we'll do that thing, and that will sort them out for their lives. Because so many times it's like a big kick to sort your life out, and people change their direction so drastically from atheists to becoming priests. And it's also, we know near-death experiences aren't so great for a lot of people because it can cause great trauma, and it takes maybe 7 to 10 years to process everything that's happening. And so I think that your near-death experience has to be exactly what you need, and it's tailored to you. And I interviewed Nancy Rhines, and she was talking about when she was on this place, she said it looked like Scotland, and she was walking across this amazing meadow with her spirit team, a couple from her spirit team. And she turned around and looked around, and the whole landscape was just disappearing in mist. It was just dissolving away. And they said, yeah, we've created this just for you, just for this experience. And I see this in distressing near-death experiences as well. And I'm reading a book about it at the moment because I'm going to be interviewing somebody. And the whole book is about distressing near-death experiences. And it's also about how people get out of them. How there was a guest I had, I think she's been on your podcast as well, and she spent 2 years, so it seemed, in hell. And towards the end of it, she was going to be attacked by a demon, but she was singing a Christmas carol. And that kind of got her out of it. And also with Howard Storm, when he started saying prayers, and then he was lifted out of his distressing near-death experience. So I'm 3/4 of the way through this book, and I think this is what the author's leading up to. It's kind of like there are people. Actually, I've got a thing here. I'll just get it on the screen if I can read this little bit to you.
Absolutely.
It's where it says, unpleasant or hell-like experience This is sometimes referred to as distressing. These scenarios are usually experienced by those who seem to have deeply suppressed or repressed guilt, fear, and anger, or those who expect some kind of punishment after death. So it's kind of like people, their mindset brings the near-death experience onto them that they need. And, you know, with Howard Storm, he had a terrible near-death experience and he was lifted out of it. And before it, he was an atheist, and afterwards, now he's become a pastor. And I think he might be retired.
I think it's really interesting because from the people that I've spoken to have had distressing experiences, they are the ones to say, I wasn't living a good life. It was all about me. I was being quite selfish, or I was not treating people the way that we should be treating people. And like you're saying, maybe they got that experience as a bit of a wake-up call to get them back on the path, get them aligned with where they need to be. What about for children or people who have them as infants or quite early on in life? Have you got any insight into that in terms of they quite possibly don't need that shake-up because their life views, their path isn't determined yet?
Yeah, this is what, when I was talking to PAMH Atwater and I read her book, she was saying that there are 4 different types of near-death experiences, is how she would say it. And one of them is a kind of, I wouldn't say a near-death experience is basic, but there's one where it's a kind of a lighter experience. Most children, she said, wouldn't have go into a lot of depth and wouldn't have amazing changes where they would go through different stages and the life review and meeting dead relatives so much. Their experience wouldn't take them that far. And I suppose with some children, their deaths are accidents. You know, there's no planning to it. And for a lot of adults, when in the reincarnation side of things, we talk about exit points, where you set them up before you're born and you choose to take one of your exit points. And children's seem to affect them and make them more confident and more intelligent and maybe a bit more mature than the children around them. And it's very interesting. Yeah, no, I loved interviewing PMH Atwater. She's such a great talker. And the book is so interesting. And the children talk about, they remember being in the womb and they remember being born. And they remember a bit before they were born and coming into the womb and then going back out again. And also, I think there were a couple of children who said, or they're adults now, saying, I remember I didn't want to be born. I jammed my legs against the pelvis when she was trying to push me out. And they talk about, she's talking about twins, where perhaps one of the twins didn't survive. And then the child talks about that twin and the parents, well, we've never told you had a twin. How would you know about this? He says, well, I remember them. I used to talk to them when we were in there together.
Yeah.
And so she said this is a medical thing I've never heard of, where one twin absorbs the other one. And so this person can have 2 blood types and can have 2 sets of skin types or something. And these sometimes talk about their brother or sister. It's like the more you look into it, the more you find out and the more confused you get.
Well, that's exactly how I feel all the time. The more people I talk to, the more I hear, the more books I read, the more I research exactly that, the more confused I am. But I kind of love that. I love that we never master this. We never have an understanding because it is so specific, so unique as well to the experiencer, to the individual. It's just fascinating. I know that we possibly don't have the full answers in this lifetime, but we can certainly explore a lot of different things. And I really love that you've done that, Simon. I really love that you've explored so many avenues. You've talked to so many different people, and I just feel like your work is helping so many people on a global level. So it is amazing chatting to you. I know we could go on for quite some time. I mean, we've only tapped on the surface of some of the experiences that you've had. I really do appreciate you joining us today and sharing some of these things. And I look forward to carrying on this conversation at a later date.
Thanks a lot. All right. Bye then.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. Don't forget you can join the free online community over at www.letstalkneardeath.com, and I look forward to sharing another episode with you soon.